actual introduction next, and it's Karen Sullivan, who's here from the West Coast Action Alliance, and she is retired from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and worked both on the NEPA and endangered species issues. She's also, you know, many may be jealous of this, sailed small boats across the Pacific to New Zealand. So a woman with much experience. So Karen Sullivan is next.
I just want to thank Emily for making such a good presentation, and also Ron for setting the stage as well, because I'm going to be building on what both of them said. In a nutshell, the Naval Air Station Whidbey Island, which is one of several military installations in the Puget Sound, Olympic Peninsula area, is becoming a mega base, and that means they are going to have, as Ron said, 153 EA-18G Growler jets there. EA stands for electronic attack. The 54 attack helicopters from Joint Base Lewis McChord are going to be repurposed, and their pilots are currently training at Whidbey Island. 6 squadrons of these souped-up 737s have been relocated to Whidbey Island, so it's becoming a mega base. It's across the Admiralty Inlet from where I live, but we hear them as if we're next to the airport sometimes. People on Whidbey Island have recorded 130 decibels on their front porches, and there's jet noise just about every day. These jets are amazing. They use, in a bad way, they use 1,300 gallons per hour of jet fuel. The military is the #1 user in the world of fossil fuel. 70% of that is jet fuel. These jets are going to be flying for 260 days a year over the Olympic Peninsula for 8 to 16 hours a day. Doing these combination of war games and electronic testing and training. One jet in 1 hour of flying produces over 12 metric tons of carbon in the air, carbon dioxide, and that is 1 hour of jet flying produces more than the average Washington citizen produces in a whole year. You'd have to drive a car 29,000 miles to produce 1 hour's worth of EA-18G Growler jet emissions. They're also twice as loud as the Prowlers, the EA-6s that they are replacing. The EA-6s are equivalent, I think, noise-wise to an F-35. A Growler is twice as loud. They also fly in trios, so you can triple that when they're flying in trios. So I'm going to present to you a little bit of the good, the bad, and the ugly. That was some ugly right there. And I'd also like to say hi to to our friends who are there. Emily from the EAC Preservation Council, our friends from CORE, Rick Abraham, from Save the Olympic Peninsula, and also if California Skywatch is listening. Our website is the westcoastactionalliance.org, westcoastactionalliance.org. And the purpose of our organization is to provide virtual support for varieties of groups who are doing more on-the-ground activism. So we are an information depot and a law library. Okay, so some good things that have happened. Public awareness of this issue is rising. We have had, since last October, actually mid-September, we've had 115 or 116 news stories. That's a good thing. The reservoir of public desire for action is growing. There are a number of websites and Facebook pages that are tracking the issue. Our group has 18 members from Alaska to California, and that doesn't include Canada, where individuals we're in communication with. And there are numerous smaller groups around that are pursuing more activist agendas. And more good news, in March, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Navy reinitiated formal consultation under Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, which means that the biological opinion which is basically what the Navy has been using to justify no significant impacts all the way to the year 2020, is going to have to be redone. That will consist of a literature search on endangered species, mostly the marbled murrelet and the spotted owl, because there isn't time between now and October, when this will come out, to complete new studies. But hopefully there are lots of new studies out there. Also, one piece of news that may affect the outcome of the biological opinion is the fact that the spotted owl, which I'm sure you may have heard of, is the population numbers are tanking. And it is the Fish and Wildlife Service has accepted a petition, has said yes to a petition to look into reclassifying the spotted owl from threatened to endangered. So that could affect the outcome of this biological opinion, which, if a jeopardy call is made, would stop the project of having the Navy use the roads in the Olympic National Forest for driving their mobile emitters, which is a key part of this training. Closure of those roads would mean, right now, logging trucks can't drive up these roads during certain nesting seasons because it passes through critical habitat. All of these sites pass through critical habitat for both the spotted owl and the marbled murrelet. And loggers aren't allowed to go up there because their generators make too much noise. Well, an F-35 flying at 1,000 feet makes 110 decibels. If a growler is twice as loud as that, and they're allowed to fly at 1,200 feet over these areas, how come the Forest Service is agreeing with the Navy on no significant impact? So we're questioning that. So the biological opinion is going to be very, very important. Other things that have happened that are good are the Port Townsend City Council and the county commissioners of all three counties have written either comment letters expressing concerns about the lack of transparency in the process and about impacts to economic and environmental things on the Olympic Peninsula. So all three counties have, political parties, actually the Democratic parties in all three counties have adopted resolutions either complaining about the lack of transparent process or supporting other counties' resolutions. So that's also good. We have, like someone else said earlier, allies in loggers, commercial fishermen, and environmentalists, often strange bedfellows, but there you are. Now, some of the negatives here, going toward the bad part. Oh, one more good one is that during the comment period, the Forest Service had last year, it was right after the Navy sneaked that environmental assessment past the public and declared no significant impact in September. Then, as Ron described, that little tiny notice in the window of the Forks Post Office was the only notice that was given to the entire North Olympic Peninsula. And that triggered an article in a small newspaper, which triggered this explosion of public interest, which triggered an extension of the comment period by the Forest Service until 3,300 comments came in by the end of the comment period, and almost 800 more came in after the comment period closed. So 4,000 comments, all against. And this is, you know, a fairly low populated area, not so much as it was, but compared to urban areas. So that's a lot of comments. So some of the negatives. Our congressional delegation is tepid at best. Our congressman has focused on the process because that's what he can do, because this is the biggest military spending state in the country, and it's the 6th district congressionally is one of the largest military spending districts in the country. We have the Bremerton sub base, we have Indian Island, we have Whidbey Island, we have, well, that's in another district, but we have a ton of military spending. So he's been able to focus on the process, but he won't address, and nor will, and our two senators, Maria Cantwell and Patty Murray, won't even answer our letters. They won't answer our calls, and part of this is because they are all being thanked profusely in a report that came out in 2012 called Expanding Military Spending and Presence, or something like that, and Activity in the State of Washington, which we have on our website. So they're silent, and they've thrown us under the bus. And so, as someone else said, I think it might have been Roseanne, they're not speaking for us, so we have to speak for ourselves. We don't have legal representation yet. We're working on it, and we've been talking to a number of lawyers, and there is a buzz in the legal community, but so far not yet. Because if you take on the Navy, you take on Boeing, and you take on Congress. And those are three big opponents around here. So, as a result, major media are not covering this issue, even though we've had actually a couple of hundred articles on this in the last 2 years. There's no major media, traditional major media coverage. The one coverage that we're getting that's fantastic is from an online news organization called Truth Out. And reporter Dar Jamal, who is sitting here next to me,
All right.
he's taking notes. But that is a huge outlet for us, and I really have to say, Dar, we really appreciate what you're doing. Okay, so you know the politicians aren't on our side. So what we have to do is basically some kind of combined public campaign out here with messages about our economy and about property values. And I hear that you are all talking about the same thing. So there needs to be some kind of message threads running through all of our work. And I think this meeting is really good for connecting us up. So I also hope that some of these presentations with the amazing facts that have been given will be accessible to the rest of us. Okay, so what are the tools that we have to use here? NEPA, of course, and most of you are very familiar, and it sounds like the Navy has a history of doing this. I was reading a book, they've been doing this for decades, this kind of shell game, so to speak, with their so-called NEPA process. And I completely agree with what Carol said earlier, that no NEPA process is legitimate until they address, these baseline and cumulative impacts. In this case, the Forest Service coming up, however, this is a hook for us legally, I hope. The Forest Service plans, they've announced this in their schedule of proposed actions. They plan to adopt the Navy's environmental assessment, which was incredibly flawed and self-serving and contained science that was false. And the Forest Service did no investigative, research of their own to corroborate or validate or confirm what the Navy did, which violates the National Forest Management Act, as well as their own policies and guidance. So we have NEPA. If the Forest Service adopts this, I think there's a hook there with NEPA. We certainly have the Endangered Species Act, and I believe we have the State Environmental Policy Act called SEPA, because one of the good news pieces was the State DNR Commissioner wrote a letter to the Navy recently saying, I'm sorry, but 3 of your mobile emitter sites are located on DNR land, and we are not going to participate in your training and testing activities. And to which the Navy has pretty much publicly replied, that's not going to stop us. And oh, by the way, we might apply for a permit. They've been, moving around on this thing for 5 years without applying for a permit. So the DNR finally closed them off, and the Navy is now going to roll them, I suspect. The forest plan is being revisited, and I suspect weakened. Some other things very quickly. State-listed species. The tufted puffin is a state candidate species, and I suspect that may be used, I hope, as some ammunition for this biological opinion that is coming up, at least proposed for listing, because its populations are tanking as well. I think tearing off what Emily said a little while ago is that forcing the state to do its own NEPA or SEPA process on fish that are our endangered salmon runs are up there in the Gulf of Alaska that are going to in the bombing area. We have endangered salmon runs in Oregon and Washington, and I think the state needs to do SEPA on that. If anyone else has that kind of situation, the fact that migratory species don't respect political borders, the state avenue might be one. The last thing I'd like to say is we've been through 6 NEPA processes this year, thousands and thousands of pages. This is in a 12-month period. 5 separate NEPA processes in the last 5 months of 2014. The public is exhausted. Those of us who are keeping up with it are absolutely, I mean, it's too much. When you've got an organization that size doing that with lawyers, it's really, really hard to keep up with it. So I think linking up with all of the groups here is going to be a very powerful thing. One of the things that we are doing is we're putting together citizen research committees where people, they gather together and they say, okay, well, let's tackle this EIS. What's the next priority thing? Let's tackle this. Okay, you read this chapter, you read this, you read this. Let's pull out the things that are the most problem, and then we'll have those identified and cited for the page, and then we, with help from people who know NEPA, we do a citizen summary, and that goes on the website alongside of the actual, often BS, NEPA document that is produced by the Navy. So that's one idea. Anyway, there are a bunch more ideas. Do I have time to just close with something that would...
Yes.
Yes,
okay.
You do.
I want to just back up something that Emily had referred to, and that is the effect on fish. I mean, we know the effects on whales. Basically, this sonar explodes their ears, causes them intense pain. Imagine, I read an article that said, imagine having a golf ball inside your head that expands to the size of a basketball and then back again to a golf ball and does this like this. Imagine that. That's what it feels like to a whale. It's also, with all that noise out there, the equivalent of throwing a blanket over your head so you can't see. And so that way they can't hunt, they can't find their group, they can't do anything. So here's the effect on fish, and this is from the recently won Ninth Circuit Court decision, the complaint for declaratory and injunctive relief written by Earth Justice and NRDC. And I quote, "High-intensity sound has been shown to reduce the viability of fish eggs and to cause developmental damage in young fish. Intense sound can kill eggs, larvae, and fry outright or retard their growth in ways that may hinder their survival later. It has also been shown to injure the ears and lateral lines necessary for hearing in adult fish. Intense sound may also have harmful resonance impacts on fish with swim bladders, particularly larger pelagic fish such as tuna. We all know what's happening to our populations of tuna and swordfish. Because fish rely on hearing to locate prey and avoid predators, effects to their hearing both impair their ability to find food and increase their vulnerability to predation." So it's just all of these subtleties with regard to noise. Anyway, thank you very much, and I'm really honored to be in such company of people who are working this hard. Thanks.